Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
You're listening to the Great Women in Compliance podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network. It's hosted by Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine. I'm Lisa Fine, and today I'm speaking with Lisa Beth Lentini Walker. She is a great friend to the podcast and to Mary and me personally. For those of you who don't know Lisa Beth, she started Lumen Worldwide Endeavors now, where she does pretty much everything relating to growing and building an ethics and compliance program and consulting and advising in so many different ways. One other thing she does is reminds us all of the importance of wellness, the power of taking a pause, and the importance of living a well-rounded life. I'm personally not really sure how she does this between her job, mentoring through MentorCore, which she started, the Compliance Career Connection, and being a mom to 4 kids and a resource to so many of us. So apparently, somehow in her non-existent free time, she managed to co-author a book with Stef Tschida called Raise Your Game, Not Your Voice. And my copy, I have to say I have both a physical and Kindle copy, are really dog-eared and highlighted. For me, when I read it, it helped me refocus on a few key points in my mind and think a little bit differently on some others. So I'm really excited to delve into those. But first, before that, Lisa Beth, how are you? How are you doing? It's been quite a year.
It's great to be here. I'm great. I have been having a time that has just been so interesting, right? Interesting in many, many, many ways. A lot of growth, a lot of pivoting, a lot of opportunities to be agile and think about things differently. So I'm really happy ending out this year, and I'm looking forward to the next year and the year after that.
Well, that's fantastic. Now that we're, at the end of this year and almost unbelievably 2 years into the pandemic, do you have any particular biggest lesson or learning? And what would you think when you think about that?
So probably my biggest lesson is a lesson for me and for how I'm navigating the world. And the message is be gentle. What I've seen is that everybody is kind of beyond their surge capacity. Like in the beginning, everyone was, kind of running around trying to figure out what's next. And we had a million Zoom meetings or virtual meetings. And now it's just like, how do we be gentle with ourselves? So many people are running on fumes, right? Just trying to eke it out. And so I think it's really important to have your plans and your backup plans and understand sometimes you just need to listen to what's going on around you, whether it's your body or the people you're interacting with. Just be a little more aware.
Now, that's a great lesson. One of the things I tried to do over the past year was focus on the core. And when I mean the core, it's not really the exercise core, but it is on what are my priorities and the people that really need me and that I need and the work that needs to get done. And I think it's sort of a corollary to being gentle. It's that people will understand. We have to be gentle to ourselves and to others because we don't know what is going on with other people.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
So to be gentle with ourselves and others. And also, I think during this holiday season with the new variant and everything going on in the world, everyone should be gentle with yourselves. So I'm going to take that one to mind. Now, with that, we're going to turn over and talk a bunch about the book. And so first, what was the impetus of the book and particularly for the topics that you talk about for you and Stef? So I'd love to hear your origin story.
So Stef and I worked together at Carlson Bogenle Travel, and we had a phenomenal working relationship. A lot of times compliance and communications can kind of come to loggerheads. But what happened with Stef and I is, we were instantly thrown into a number of different situations where we had to work very closely together under tight timeframes, et cetera. Instead of getting to a point where we were not seeing eye to eye, we actually got to a point where we kind of grew closer together and understood the strengths and challenges that each of us brought to that relationship. So there was a magic there in that relationship, a deep level of trust. And one of the things that, I like to do is I like to surround myself with really good people. And so when I find good people, I think, how do we stay together? How do we find ways to amplify what the other person is doing and create a situation where 1 + 1 is actually greater than 2? And so Stef and I both started on our entrepreneurial ventures at about the same time, and we always knew that we wanted to work together. And this book was a perfect opportunity for us to bring the magic of our relationship and what we learned from each other together into a work product that we were working on together and now are talking about together. So, part of this is very self-serving. I like to be with good people. I like to have the opportunities to create magic with good people. And Stef is one of my favorite people in the world. So there you go. We decided we both wanted to write something. We knew that our experience was unique. And so we took it from there.
Well, that's a really cool way to do it. I feel like I have a similar opinion about my experience in co-writing a book and working on the podcast. My, partner in compliance, or however we call it, I feel like, it was just the idea of being able to collaborate with somebody who not only do you think is a good person, but has certain qualities that helps you become stronger in what you're doing. And Mary and I talk about that fairly regularly, our similarities and our differences, and we build that. But what about for you in co-authoring and collaborating? What did you think were the, being a good person, obviously having similar views, but for a writing partner? Because you both did a lot of writing in the book.
It's like any relationship. So our relationship is founded on this deep trust that we have in each other, in the abilities that each person brings to the equation. And because we have this deep trust, it's not only okay, but kind of expected that we will challenge and push each other forward in ways that we grow together and grow in our individual capacities. So when thinking about co-authoring a book, you have to really get along with somebody, I think, to have a joint view of how this product will turn out. And you should bring out the best in each other, because otherwise it's very easy to get into unhealthy relationships. And, fortunately, I'd already had this working experience with Stef, so I knew exactly what we were capable of and how much more we would do together, as opposed to like us writing separate books or anything like that. So when you're thinking about a co-authoring partner, make sure it's somebody you like. Make sure it's somebody who makes you better. Make sure it's somebody who brings different skills and perspectives to the table, because it's a much richer product, a much richer experience that way.
Yeah, I 100,000% agree on that one. So now one of the things after you started writing the book, and I'm actually going to say one of the points that stuck with you the most was one from the beginning when you talk about different qualities and characteristics of what you call a scholar. The one, you can talk a bit about that generally, but for me, one of them that stuck out a lot was persistence. And once you talk a little bit about the scholar characteristics, I think I'll delve in a little bit more about why that one really resonated.
So when I talk about persistence, it doesn't mean continuing to do the same thing again and again and again and again. The broader goals in life are kind of what you need to have persistence towards. The fact of the matter is, throughout life and throughout anybody's experience, there are going to be inconsistencies, there are going to be false starts, there are going to be a whole bunch of different challenges that are in there. It's not how many times you fall down as you're trying to accomplish these broader goals, whether they be life career goals or compliance program goals. It's how you get up and how you learn from the experiences and continue to move forward. It doesn't have to be the exact same movement that you were doing before, but it does need to be something where you continue to find ways to thrive. And that's where, I think this theme of persistence is really important.
Now, for me, I'm going to go back. Tom, I'm going to restart. In talking about persistence, one of the things that makes it such an important theme for me is because I believe it's very important to tailor our programs and tell our story and to, be pretty tough on in doing that and persistent. But sometimes I think you're talking about trying things in different battles, but what's the difference to you between, giving up on something or saying this is a battle that's okay to lose versus continuing the persistence?
So for me, life is definitely about choices, professionally, personally, etc. And it's really important to know that when you are going into battle or doing anything in life that takes more than just a momentary effort, you need to choose what the priorities are. If your approach is, I have to win every battle, no matter what, you are going to alienate everyone around you because you're going to be the person who has to be right all the time. And you are also going to have a myopic view of the wealth of solutions that exist. You don't have to be right every time. You don't have to, decide every hill is the one that you are going to have to take. You need to think about setting the right goals and learning along the way, because not every choice that you make is going to be the right choice in the right moment with the right people at the right time. And part of this is knowing that persistence is important, but so is humility and the ability to adapt. And so don't get lost in this thought that you have to persist no matter what, and be unwilling to see the wealth of solutions, opportunities, and potentially better choices than you imagined along the way.
And I also think that talks a lot about how we can look at what our other stakeholders and business people will do. And they may have the points that we've not really thought about. And I mean, but it's always in my mind, when am I fighting? What am I fighting for? What does it matter? Am I being persistent, or, is this just getting annoying for annoying's sake? I mean, I think those are battles I think we deal with not just in compliance, but kind of in life. But with that, let's move on a little bit about talking about communications. And you talk a lot, and you mentioned it even at the beginning here, of working with Stef and working with corporate communications and communicating in the absence of a part of that structure. I'd like to talk a little bit about that and then about functions.
Great. So I think one of the things that we should talk about is, sometimes there's internal communications and sometimes there's external communications. Sometimes there's no communications function, right? When there's no communications function, you're going to fill in the gaps, right? You need to be basically your own communications manager. When you have internal communications and external communications combined, well, then you have a single audience. They may have multiple stakeholders and multiple audiences that they're addressing. You need to know what each of those stakeholders care about and what that communication rhythm is to try to see how do you best fit into that. Because communicators in general aren't going to say, well, we're going to communicate because compliance tells us to. They like to have more of a holistic feel and more of a connecting point with their audience, which is great. They understand audience dynamics. They can be extraordinarily helpful in helping you to get your message out. Now, sometimes you have internal communications and external communications separate. Hopefully, they're not completely divorced from each other, because otherwise you may have messages that are not aligned. Stakeholders often overlap between internal and external communications. So there should be some consistency and some connecting point in that. And hopefully that's the case with your organization as well, is that there are common connecting points and common points of interest for those different groups.
Yeah. That's really helpful, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And as you talk a lot right here, we're talking about how we communicate ourselves or work with functions. But one other thing that I think a lot about is asking other people to do our communications for us. Managers at all levels. I like people to talk about the importance of speaking up in non-retaliation. If your manager says something to you like, "Look, I hope you feel like you can reach out to me, to your HR person, really, but if you can't, or if you don't want to, or if you want to have an issue with me, here is how you speak up through our company's, hotline or raise concerns, because it's more important to me that you raise the concerns. I think that makes a much better message. I often say it's also the cheapest message you can send than the constant, ethics and compliance wants to hear. So what practical tips do you have about this, and what's your thought?
So one of the things that they always say in communications is 7 times, 7 ways. You want to land your message 7 different times in front of whatever audience you are working with in 7 different ways. That can include having other people be the delivery mechanism for that message. I think ambassadors have the potential to be fantastic, and oftentimes they are. I also think that it can be a double-edged sword. So if what you're doing is giving your, chosen ambassador talking points and they don't really feel them, then that will come through in how they communicate. So if you're volunteering people to deliver this message, sometimes they can actually do more damage than good. So know who those kind of speakers and selected leaders are, and make sure that they actually buy in to the message that you're having them land. If they do, extraordinarily powerful messaging, extraordinarily impactful communications will happen. But if you have someone who is not believing the message, is taking this as a checklist item, and their speech patterns just show that, it actually, I think, ends up losing credibility for the program. So choose wisely. With all things in life, choose wisely.
Yeah, that is a life lesson, but there's nothing worse than trying to get a bunch of people to draft them to give these messages. And the next thing you know, they didn't want to. And then there are other people who care as much. And then that ruins kind of it for everybody a little bit. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, there's nothing like somebody stepping up in front of a group and saying, well, I'm here because compliance told me I had to be. And this is what they told me I had to say.
Right.
And then
I'm going to read this for you.
Right? That is so far from what you want to have happen.
I've asked some questions that resonated with me. And I wanted to know some questions you're getting from readers and clients that are consistent themes or concerns that you'd like to share. And obviously along with some of the answers.
So one of the questions I get often is, when it comes to compliance messaging, the scared them straight kind of tactic in terms of like the don't do drugs messaging or whatever you want to call it, is something that has resonated with many people over the years. And I often get asked, well, if we tell the same messages about how not complying with what the rules are bad, and people understand that they can go to jail, then what's the problem here? And my answer to that is, look, if the only message that you are sending is that if you don't do what I tell you to, you're going to go to jail, you are missing out on so many opportunities to have people make better decisions for themselves because of a variety of motivators, including the potential to do better for the business, increased revenue, all of the purpose-driven decisions. You're missing out on that if you keep telling the same story the same way. If you keep telling people that if they don't do the compliance right, that they're going to go to jail, then every time that they do something that doesn't land them in jail, they are showing that your message is untrustworthy. So you have to vary that message to connect with people. Another question that we often get is around navigating your stakeholders and understanding your stakeholders' drivers. And I think that this is a tough space for many people, but it's really important to understand the people that you're working with and the audiences that you have, because they are not all built like me, right? If everybody was built like me, I'd know exactly what to do to get them to do what I would like them to do. But the world is a beautiful and wonderful place. Thank goodness there aren't a million copies of me, because that would be extraordinarily boring. And we would be missing like huge skill sets. So really understand those stakeholders. And when you're talking to your audience, it's about them. Like, the world doesn't revolve around me. The world doesn't revolve around making the compliance program look good. The world revolves around each and every audience person and each and every stakeholder. So understanding that makes you a much more powerful communicator.
Yeah, that makes a tremendous amount of sense and is a really, really good lesson. I also have learned when trying to communicate with, and we often talk about business or salespeople or other people within the business. I'm going to talk about some other people in my beginning field of lawyers who will come into these things and say, compliance, rather, we're doing this investigation. Why does X, Y, or Z? And we've talked about this with HR people. Why does this HR team not consider this the most critical thing they're dealing with? Right now, this is huge. This is this and this and this. And then you say, do you realize the other 20 things that this particular person is dealing with? To them, those are the equivalent of what you're doing. So again, when you're talking about, will it land me in jail? That's that message gets tiring when it's like, okay, so it didn't land me in jail, but I also, I didn't get fired because I didn't think about this either. And then people think, somehow this message doesn't matter because there's nothing between jail and, doing what we need to do for the business. And I think that ignores ethical decision making to some extent.
100%. And I mean, look, at the end of the day, the message that I want to send doesn't particularly matter if the person doesn't want to receive it. So you need to give a message that someone will take in, or there is no communication. So it's really important to understand that just because I want to say something doesn't mean that will be absorbed by the universe or the person that I'm saying it to. It has to be meaningful to that person.
Yeah. And one other thing, as you were talking, it occurred to me, and I really want to ask you about this, because one thing that I think that you do really, really well, just as you're talking about different skill sets, is you have a way of communicating. I think that in all of our professions or whatever we're doing, we all sort of learn our own language to speak, and individuals do too. But one thing I've seen talking to you in different contexts, whether it's talking to job seekers or doing consulting or presenting, or even just talking to sort of a group of people informally, is the way that you really manage to speak the language of the other people. What tricks and skills have you learned to make yourself so good at that?
Wow. Well, that's a huge compliment. Thank you. I think in terms of speaking someone else's language, I am a big fan of total immersion if you can get it. Really immersing yourself in what the people that you're working with are reading, seeing, doing, experiencing. That goes a long way. And also thinking about it from, a teaching perspective. Like, I think deep in my heart, I've always been a teacher. And teaching is not about how much you know, it's about how much you connect to help others in their learning journey. And so when I look at it, I look at it as part of this is translation, being able to take whatever you know and creating a path for people to either learn or be able to have broader perspectives because of the way that you're bringing that to the table. And so, for me, I like being a translator. I like being a teacher. I like being with people and lifting them up as we rise together.
Well, you do that, and you do it in the way that really resonates with others. I mean, I say it in a slightly different context too, often about like the DOJ guidelines or other things. I could know them better than anyone in the world, but who cares about that? Almost none of my stakeholders, after they know I know them, because they want to know what applies to me. What do I need to do? What should I understand? They don't really care about, the most innovative, important writings on the topic. And I constantly try to work on that because, on the other hand, I'm proud of what we do in our community. But I also am trying to recognize, and that's one of the things that I think you do you do teach us that. So.
Thank you. And I look at it, one of the things that I think is really helpful to kind of use along the way is, we go to a doctor or any type of medical professional because they know a lot and they can help us when we need help. I don't need them to tell me everything on the latest studies of whatever is going on in whatever part of somebody's body. What I need to know is that they have taken the time to understand their craft, they understand their field, and they're able to explain things to me so that I can make good choices. And that's what we do in compliance and ethics too. We explain things so that people can make better choices and follow paths that are more that are beneficial, right? They don't have to know all the ins and outs of the DOJ guidance. They don't need to know all of that. They need to know that you're an expert in your craft and you're there to help, and you help to create an environment where they can make better decisions.
I agree with that. I don't love it when the pilots do that. If the plane's being delayed, when they explain to me everything that's happening in the air between where I am and where I'm going. Sometimes I'm like, I just want to know I'm going to get there safely. I don't really need to know about all the wind currents, the power, and how some other planes have turbulence. Like, good to know, but just my need to know basis is we're safe. We're making it there. With that, is there any other thing from the book or just generally from the year that you'd like to share before we close up?
The only other thing I would like to share is thank you for having me on the podcast. I am so excited about what 2022 is bringing for you, for Mary, for your book, for all of the wikis out there. And so I am just thrilled that I'm ending the year with an opportunity to talk to you.
Well, thank you. I really wanted to end the year. This is going to be my last interview for the year. So you are someone who has really been, I don't know, I've mentioned it before, has helped me with my career, helping me into this profession and into my current role. And I just am so thrilled that not only for all the successes that you've had, but all the things I learn and continue to learn from you, particularly in your book, which is just, this is a really helpful, practical tool that's very readable and helpful. And I mean, like I said, when I started, I did actually dog ear and I started checking things off. And then kind of towards the middle, I'm like, it's one of those things like you can't do that on every page. So thank you for giving us the wisdom of all that. And mostly thank you for your friendship and for being just a tremendous and wonderful part of my 2021. And on behalf of Mary and me, Compliance Podcast Network, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.